This is Wrestledope here on YouTube, and indeed today we have a very, very special guest. He was at one time a wrestler, also a promoter for so many promotions including Mid-Southern Wrestling, CWA and the USWA, and also just in the last few years wrote the book The Story of the Development of the NWA-TNA. And of course always you must mention that indeed Jerry was the creator of TNA Wrestling, and of course that has gone from strength to strength in these past few years. Mr. Jerry Jarrett, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you joining us, and there are so many questions I think we could ask you. We could be speaking with you all night, I'm sure. But to start off from the very beginning, I know in the early days you started in the business very, very early. I believe maybe 6 or 7 years of age that you actually had a role in the business at that time.
Yes, I like to joke that I was born in the business. My mother worked in the business, and so as a ticket seller, and that put me, around the business. At a very early age, Nick Goulas, the local promoter, gave me a job selling the little programs called Slamagram at his weekly matches. And then as I got a promotion, and he moved me to taking up the tickets on the front door. I got my driver's license at 14, and he gave me the opportunity, Roy Welch and Nick Goulas did, to promote the spot shows, the little country towns around Nashville. And so my promotion career started long before my active participation in the ring.
Absolutely, of course.
I promoted and then I went on to college and went to work for a manufacturing company after I got out of college. Found out real quick I didn't like the corporate world, so I went back and got a temporary job with the promotion, working in the wrestling office, and that temporary job lasted for the next 40 years.
That's incredible. And of course you started off life away from the promotion side as actually a referee, isn't that correct?
Yes. When I came back from Murray, Ohio, after I left that job and took my temporary job, I was trying to pick up all the money I could. So one day a referee was involved in a car accident, and the wrestling office asked me would I get a striped shirt and referee that night. So I did, and then they got to giving me bookings quite regularly, 4 or 5 times a week as a referee. I've found that is the most underappreciated, most difficult job in the business. So I was complaining one day to Tojo Yamamoto that I wish I could do anything other than referee. And he suggested, why don't you wrestle? I said, I don't know how. And he said, I'll teach you. And that led to my escape from being a referee and to start my active career as a wrestler.
Being a wrestler at that time must have been a lot different than it is today. I often have looked at classic wrestling footage, and I always find it notable that fans are so into what they're seeing. They seem so excitable and so excited at what is happening in the ring. And of course also fans would get quite aggressive towards heels as well, the evil characters, if you like, who perhaps they saw as being dastardly evil. Of course oftentimes people got attacked by fans.
Oh yes, I've been in many rides, and they are really a scary situation to be in. I don't know what you call it, but a mass hysteria takes over in an arena when a riot happens, and people for no reason will just start fighting somebody next to them. It's a crazy situation. I think the reason it was, when I started wrestling in the late '60s, I guess you'd call it the world of kayfabe was dominant, and the wrestlers and the promoters did everything they could do to not flaunt the fact the business was not a legitimate contest in the fans' face. They allowed them to believe, at least while they were at the arena. Now, of course, when they got home, they'd say, you really can't jump off of the top rope and land in a person's throat. So I'm sure there were some doubts, but while you were, excuse me, while you were at the matches, you could put your questions and disbeliefs in the back of your mind and enjoy it as if you were seeing a fight. And I think this is the reason the people were more emotionally invested. As time went on, in the early days, you had to have a reasonable amount of mat skills. You had to know how to wrestle. As time went on, us promoters quit or started de-emphasizing wrestling ability in favor of showbiz. And one generation after another generation after another generation led it to the point that, it really doesn't resemble a contest in most cases.
Yeah, it's crazy how I think the difference is from these days going back to, we'll say, a Mid-South Coliseum where you can walk in for 3 hours and completely put everything aside, whatever worries you have, and completely just suspend that disbelief. Do you think it's kind of lost, that art is lost today in today's world of wrestling?
Yes, it's a whole different world today, and but there are, my grandkids absolutely love John Cena, and when my grandchildren are 50 years old, I'm sure they will look back and say, boy, I wish wrestling was like it was in my day.
Absolutely. You mentioned the word kayfabe there, and as fans, we often, doing this particular show here, we kind of talk about the business in the sense that we kind of maybe know the terminology now, and we kind of maybe perceive it to be a certain way. My question for you is, do you think that perhaps as fans that, the term smart is often used, smart mark, smart fan, is it true to say that perhaps you don't really know the business unless you're in the business?
Right. I get a big kick out of the word smart mark. It ought to be dumb mark, because the people that think they understand the business and have never been in the business, have never been in the ring. And by the way, there are some people that are in the business that aren't smart to the business.
Right.
But it's funny. It's almost like this clique or cult has formed since the internet, and it's like, everybody goes, oh, I know the business will work, so I'm smart. And in a way that's ludicrous. The people that are smart to the business know they don't know all about the business, and I'm in that category. I know a part of the business, but I don't know all of it.
Sure. Do you think, looking back, for guys that you've worked with previously, right back maybe early 80s, if you look at somebody like Andy Kaufman there, somebody who wasn't really, I suppose, a worker in a sense, or wasn't really involved with the business, but to come in and perform on the level he did, be it in a psychology sense or just the way he could garner that heat so quickly. Your thoughts on that?
Andy was truly, I hate to use the word, but he was truly smart to the business. Andy understood what it was about. Andy understood that you wanted to be so real that the people were able to believe in you. Now, that's not to say the people believed what you were doing was a shoot, but they were able to believe in your character and emotionally invest in you. And Andy understood that. And I can tell you that I worked with a number of people at TNA. I worked with bookers and writers that had no idea what Andy Kaufman knew about the business, or not to his level of or depth of understanding of the business. And so, whether you're in the business or not in the business, there are some people that get it and some people that don't.
Absolutely, of course. These days as well, wrestlers often share their lives and thoughts on websites like Twitter and Facebook, to name just a few. Is that, do you think, a wise move for perhaps people who have a character that they portray on screen to perhaps be sharing so much maybe daily minutiae from their lives? I mean, is that in a sense maybe damaging to their character?
Yes. The short answer is yes, absolutely. The one difference in today's wrestler and the wrestlers of yesterday, the wrestlers of yesterday understood that a sports writer or a person who writes in a magazine, or the promoter or the booker, were not the talent's boss. The talent understood, the talent of yesterday understood to listen to the people, because a promoter cannot like you at all. And if the fans love you, whether they want to cheer for you or boo you, if the fans love you and support you, the booker's going to book you. He has no choice but to book you. It doesn't matter if we had had the internet in, say, the 60s and 70s. I'm talking about had it to the level that it is now. I don't think any of the wrestlers would have even read it, let alone pay any attention to it.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
Because they understood that because somebody writes about you and gives you a 5-star match has nothing to do with how good or bad your matches are. Only the fans can determine whether you are going to draw money or not draw money. It was really a strange experience when I started TNA, because I had been away from the business for several years, and I would see wrestlers rehearsing their match. You do this, and then I'll do this, and then you do this, and I'll do this, throughout a whole 10-minute match, 15-minute match. Lay out every move, and I would walk up to them, and I'd say, "What are you doing?" "Well, we're going through our match." Well, what happens if the fans don't like your routine? Well, they just don't like it. We planned it out. And I said, "Don't you ever listen to the fans?" And no. And it was a different culture for me. I just did not understand it.
Do you think speaking of the start of TNA or NWA-TNA, you think creative decisions these days, how do you find them on par with from the kind of heydays of Mid-South and the USWA? In a sense, do you think a lot of stuff has been revisited, or they just keep on rehashing the same angles that just because they got over in the 70s and 80s that there's hope from these days?
Well, I mean, here is the thing. My opinion, your opinion, no difference, and I have a radio show. So I'm not knocking you because I'm in the same business. I have a radio show here in Nashville. But my opinion really doesn't matter. People enjoy hearing it, I think, on the radio because it gets decent ratings. But it really doesn't matter. The way we used to have the wrestling business was your match was graded by the fans every night, week in and week out. And if you did not draw, if you did something stupid, the people just didn't show up the next week. So this bred an environment of doing things right the first time. Now, would we screw up? Absolutely. But we didn't screw up by 1 week. And then we went back to what the fans wanted. When we put on a television show, we didn't have to wait until Tuesday night or Monday night or Thursday night to find out if our TV show was good. Today, TNA will go to Orlando and do a show. And the people are telling the owners, oh, it'll pay off sooner or later. And sooner or later comes and it still is not paying off. They don't have that built-in reward that is necessary to know when you're on the right track or not.
Sure.
Indeed, of course, talking...
And,
go ahead, yeah.
Vince McMahon at WWE is under the same set of circumstances, except that he does tour regularly. And he knows if his TV is heading in the right direction. He knows if his pay-per-view is heading in the right direction. And that's the only way a promoter can survive. Because if you don't care, if you are willing to subsidize the business, then it never will get any better. Not only not from week to week, but it won't get any better from year to year.
Indeed, of course, looking back to the days when you formed NWA-TNA, at that time, what was the aim, if you like? Was it to sort of create a company that would rival the WWE at the time, or in a sense, was it to create your own niche and your own wrestling product?
Yeah, well, Jeff was working at WCW when they folded. And he had burned a bridge with Vince and WWE. So when he saw that the independent market was not sustainable, he came to me and he said, let's form a wrestling company. And one thing led to another, and I didn't have $50 million to put into it, so we did the pay-per-view start. And my original goal was to capture the audience that WCW used to have. And when I say used to have, before the era that they went downhill, before the Bischoff-Russo era. Because, WCW was viable and lasted. Now, they wasn't as strong as WWF, but they held their own and they were profitable. That audience went away when Vince McMahon took over. About a 3.5 ratings worth of people disappeared and never came back. They didn't watch Raw. They didn't, they just went away. So my idea was to capture them. But then me and my son Jeff and most of the people there had creative differences. They wanted to be like WWE. And I felt like was as crazy a idea as if we were in the soft drink business saying, well, let's compete with Coke. Let's
you got your work cut out.
Why not come up with a different soda and not even try to be Coke Light? And anyway, so I was in turmoil. If you read the book, The Development of TNA, I was in turmoil from the very beginning because we never went after the audience that I happen to personally believe is still available to somebody to start a wrestling company. And that is somebody that will start a company and demand from the talent that they wrestle and understand that the people are their bosses, and wrestle to please the fans, wrestle to allow the fan to suspend disbelief. Forget about the crazy storylines. There's been a lot written and a lot said about how smart I was in Memphis with the Memphis Wrestling to make it where it was a legend. And the truth of it is I really wasn't that smart. I just kept it simple. The storylines dealt with real life events. And somebody could come along and if that was brilliant, they could be brilliant all over again.
Yeah, it's great to kind of go back to those days, like you say, when you tagged with Tojo and you tagged with Jackie Fargo, the great Jackie Fargo. Getting back to that side of it, the reality, and bringing those kind of, not to use the word kayfabe again, but those storylines in a real reality sense into the ring. How do you find angles like that these days? I know your son Jeff was involved with that angle with Kurt Angle and of course Karen. Your thoughts on that?
I know what they were attempting to do, but when you don't have the producer that will view something and say, I just don't really believe that. Let's do it a different way, or let's do it over again. Then it's not going to come across, even though the base of the storyline is based on reality. A great movie has to have a great producer. It has to have great actors, and it has to have a great storyline. It has three legs to that stool. The director or producer or whoever's making the suggestions, the actors, and the storyline. And it take away any one of them, and you fail. You can't have a great movie and have a bad director and a great story and great actors. You can have a great director and a great story and poor actors, and it's not a great movie. It takes all three. So, my answer is why I don't think some of the things get over. One of the three ingredients is missing.
Of course, on the TNA program now, we've seen the changeover to the Impact branding and sort of a difference in how the program looks, and some new storylines being developed. Of course, that slogan as well that's being used is Wrestling Matters. Many people saying that perhaps that's a counter to WWE and indeed perhaps what they've been showing on their programming. Do you think if there was a show that was pure wrestling and that perhaps had no entertainment strands bar the storylines and what we see in ring, do you think that would draw in this day and age?
I think it would. Here is the futility of that. The campaign in and of itself is solid. The idea is good. The trouble is that when you have the same cooks in the kitchen that have made this food for 5 or 6 years that is not palatable, and you decide, well, we're going to throw out all of this corn and beans and we're going to buy some new corn and beans. As long as you have the same chef there, it's going to taste like crap. The general manager of our radio station posted on the website from our program, and he said, you can paint a turd blue, but it's still a turd.
It's a fair point.
now, you know, I'm torn because I want TNA to succeed. I have grandchildren's futures that are at stake. But, you know, as long as they keep the same management team in place, I don't care if they call it Impact, Deepak, Explosion, or TNA. It doesn't matter what they call it. It doesn't matter what new set they buy. These are not what needs fixing.
Do you think, actually, speaking of which, that I know financially this may definitely come into question for them, but being in the impact zone week in and week out, I know there's not much they can really do about it, but do you think it's definitely I suppose obvious that you know it's an issue for them?
I'm sorry, I missed that question.
I was just talking about the actual impact zone itself, the resort there in the studios where they hold the impact tapings. Do you think it's detrimental to them to be in that position as opposed to being out touring? I know, considering financially, it does cost a lot of money for them to do it, but you think it's
no, the venue does not have anything to do with it. If it were my company, I'd move back to the fairgrounds in Nashville, because I don't think anybody cares where the ring is set up. You know, they thought, well, you know, it'll look real good if we're at Universal Studios. Nobody cares. Nobody judges Raw based on what town they're in. The things that matter is what you produce, the hour of television that you produce. We produced in a little rinky-dink studio at WHBQ television in Memphis and had 27 ratings, 70 and 80 share for 15 or 20 years running. Doesn't that prove that it doesn't matter what your location or your venue is?
That's a great point.
It's the story that matters. Like one of the great successful shows on television was Friends. I don't know if it was on over there or not, but
it was indeed. Yeah.
Yep.
The sitcom Friends was a phenomenon here in the States. I don't know. I never paid any attention if they were produced in Humboldt, Tennessee, or Los Angeles, or New York. It didn't matter. I never asked. What studio are you in?
Talking about ratings, and you mentioned earlier how even at 3.5 or so in terms of the ratings, these people went away, they stopped watching. These days the ratings are far, far down on perhaps what they would have been 10 years ago. What do you think is the fundamental reason for that, and if there was anything that perhaps could be done to draw those people back, if you like?
Vince's ratings aren't down. I mean, they fluctuate, of course, and they're up and down, but when Vince was running against Ted Turner, he got between a 3 and a 4. And I haven't checked his ratings in the past year or so. I had no reason to. But I'm going to guess he's still between a 3 and a 4, isn't he?
I imagine so, yeah. I think it is about 3 and a half, maybe.
I think so. I did hear talk, perhaps maybe in the mid-90s, that they were up even higher, maybe in the 6, 7s, but maybe I'm wrong there. I wouldn't maybe be accurate.
Well, he jumped up there 1 week after he bought WCW. The 3.4 ratings that watched Turner went over and watched Raw.
Right.
And they didn't like what they see, and they went away. And the next week, he was right back down to the week before he bought them out.
Speaking of WCW, before you put in the bid for WCW, or even before NWA-TNA was set up, for a brief period you went to work for Vince. Can you tell us your thoughts or what led to that transpiring?
It was very simple. Vince, the government came after Vince for the most stupid of reasons, trying to charge him with steroid distribution, and Vince might have done a lot of things in his life, but he didn't do that. That's crazy. But somebody wanted to make a name for themselves, so they came after him. And Vince had a great staff around him, but nobody that knew all the roles. So, he called me, and we had a series of several weeks worth of conversation, and he needed somebody in the event that he lost the trial and had to go to jail. So he asked me would I come up and get acclimated. So I did. He was exonerated in the trial, and I left 2 or 3 days later because I was homesick. I missed my family. I missed Tennessee. I'm nothing against Stamford, Connecticut, but it's not for me.
Sure.
You're talking about people trying to break into the business, and maybe people are out there now who are trying to learn the ropes, if you like. What would be the best path for a person on their way in to become an in-ring competitor? Would it be the traditional wrestling school route, or perhaps it's more an apprenticeship type thing? Or how do you think it would best work for a person now if they wanted to do that?
Never, ever forget how you view wrestling as a fan. And then when you get into the business, regardless of how much instruction you have from who you have it from, be true to the business. Love the business, believe in your role. If somebody wants you to be a Mexican jumping bean and you feel more like a Cuban jumping bean, be the Cuban jumping bean. They can put a sombrero on you, and that's all right. But be true to who you are so that you can convey. If you don't believe your role while you're in the ring, nobody else is. And I think that's the biggest thing as far as mental. Of course, physically, learn your trade, learn your skills, work on your body. The days of being a 6'4" tubby are gone. That doesn't mean you have to look like Charles Atlas, but stay physically fit. Learn the business, and then pray to God every night that you'll get a break.
Speaking of the Mexican jumping beans and crazy gimmicks, what would you have to say about the gimmicks these days? Do you think the argument kind of goes from a lot of people that there's just too many guys in tights, that they all look the same, they all got a double barrel name, and that's that?
Yeah, see, if you say characters, people's mind will jump ahead and you'll think of Doink the Clown or the Scuffling Hillbillies. That's not true. Jimmy Hart played Jimmy Hart, and Jerry Lawler played Jerry Lawler, and Dusty Rhodes played Dusty Rhodes the American Dream in stage, when he was in the ring, and when he's outside the ring. Randy Macho Man Savage was the exact same character when I'm sitting on his balcony looking out at the Gulf of Mexico in St. Pete Beach, as he was when he stood in Memphis TV or in Madison Square Garden making an interview. He was the same person. He played himself all the time.
There's a lot to be said. Go ahead.
So, develop your character of who you are, and then make it bigger than life. But I don't think people are very successful when Joe Smith tries to play like he's Ben Smith.
Exactly. This is it. Going right back and speaking of guys like a Macho Man or a Dusty Rhodes, who were kind of the same on the outside of the ring as they were on the inside, I just want to talk for a moment about Hulk Hogan and the fact that, and I didn't know this until recently, that you were one of the ones who actually, or if not the one, who gave him the finisher of that leg drop that became infamous over the years. Yeah,
and we worked on that because at the time Hulk was very limited in his athletic ability, and because of his size and the way he looked, I said, people will buy this, that you drop that big leg on somebody, and of course I was the guinea pig, and he sat in my face 2 or 3 times, and I thought he broke my head. But he developed that. You don't have to. Back to the kids again that are breaking in. Accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. If you are not comfortable climbing up on the top turnbuckle and doing a flip off, don't do it. If you can do that, don't do it.
Of course, another guy I know worked in one of your territories in the past was Khosrow Vaziri, of course also better known as the Iron Sheik. I wonder if you have any stories about the Iron Sheik from back in the early days.
Yeah. Ali is what I called him, Vaziri. He was working for me, and he was a character, and he said, "Jerry, I understand you live in a castle." I said, "Yes. I guess you might call it a castle. It's a big house, Ali." He said, "Oh, could I see?" And I gave him a ride to Memphis, so I said, "Yeah, you can see." And he got his buddy to follow him over to my house, and we went in to the house, and I'm showing him around the living room and the dining room and the kitchen, and he takes off heading down the hall. And I'm following him, and he opens up the door, and he goes, "Oh, beautiful bedroom." And my wife is in bed, and she set up real quick and let out a blood-curdling scream. Here's this bald-headed Iranian standing in her room saying, "Oh, bedroom." But Allie was the character. I ran in and said, "Excuse us, honey, I'll be right to bed." Allie wanted to see the house.
That's incredible. Speaking of guys that you brought into the business and kind of nurtured, like a Hogan or a Savage, and many others over the years. One that I always kind of thought was probably one of the best, if not one of the greatest managers of all time. Just a personal choice, but some will say different. Would be Jim Cornette.
Jimmy Cornette's mother, Thelma, would bring Jimmy to the matches, and she met my mother, and they became good friends. So Jimmy took pictures in Louisville, and my mother would come to me every week and say, "Jimmy is just dying to come to Memphis. Will you let him?" And I'd say, "No, I don't need any headaches down there. He can get all the pictures he wants in Louisville." Well, Thelma was persistent, and my mother was persistent, and finally I said, "Okay, let him come down, but he's got to stay out of the way." So he came down and started taking pictures at Memphis TV. And Jimmy loves to talk, and his favorite subject is himself. So one day I'm in the break room having a cup of coffee talking to somebody, and Jimmy's at the next table holding court. And after about 5 minutes, I said to whoever I was sitting at my table with, I said, "That guy is driving me nuts. I have the urge to get up and go over there and slap the shit out of him to shut him up." And my friend said, "No, just tell him to go back to Louisville. You're the one that let him come down here." I said, "I know it." And then he kept on talking, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, if this guy is generating this kind of emotion in me, then he would be a great manager. So I went to him and I said, "Have you ever thought about being a manager?" And he said, "No, but I'm sure I could." I said, "Well, show up next week." He said, "What do you want me to do?" And I said, "Well, just show up and be yourself." I said, "Everybody will want to kill you." And so he did, and that was the start of it.
Talking about managers such as Jim Cornette, there has been speculation that maybe there's a trend now in WWE to start getting managers back on the TV again. Now, of course, I think for a while I kind of had the perception that a lot of times it was perhaps divas as valets, and that maybe that classic kind of Bobby Heenan, Jim Cornette role kind of went away. Why do you think that was, and would you kind of think it's a good move to bring those managers back and to kind of get that heat for maybe guys who can't talk for themselves?
Yeah, I think it's great, because the reason managers came into existence was because the promoters realized that sometime you had a person who was not athletic who could talk and make great interviews, and you had another person that could make great interviews but had no athletic ability. So managers were created in the business so they could become the mouthpiece for the talent that couldn't talk. And of course today you have more of a need for managers than ever, because a lot of the guys that look good in the ring are not coherent, and they certainly can't make a money interview. Money interview, that's where you can talk people into buying a ticket. There are, there's just not a lot of the talent that can do it all around. Dwayne Johnson could do it all. He could make an interview and he could have a great match.
Absolutely.
Stone Cold Steve Austin could do it all. Jerry Lawler in his prime could do it all. But I kept Jimmy Hart and Jimmy Cornette because I had so many wrestlers that couldn't do it all.
Sure. I just want to ask you quickly about going right back again to the days of the NWA, where you would have these, in a sense, meetings, convention meetings, to decide on who would be the next NWA champion. Just for a second, can you, in some way, try paint a picture for us of that environment in those meetings?
Yeah, well, it goes all the way back in the 50s. The federal government came in and said the NWA is a syndicate. And, that's against the law. You can't be a wrestling, even though it's owned by a bunch of people. It's like, the mafia families own different cities. So they had everybody in the wrestling business, to avoid prosecution, sign a consent decree. And that consent decree said, we won't do it again. We won't keep people out of the business, and we won't protect each other. And of course that was ludicrous. It just went on just like it always had been. It just was undercover more. So once a year there would be a convention, and at the convention all of the NWA officers would come, and then Vern Gagne would come representing AWA, and Vince McMahon Sr. would come representing WWF in those days. And it was all one body of promoters, but now there were 3 banners. And, then everybody would campaign for their man. And Eddie Graham was very powerful, and he was able to get Jack Briscoe and Dory Funk and Terry Funk in. Sam Munchnick was very powerful, and just different people would campaign, and then they would vote. And Sam Munchnick campaigned for Harley Race. And then they would vote, and whoever won the vote would be the champion. And you would have to, I think that it was $25,000 back in the day that the promoter would have to post guaranteeing that the wrestler would do business when it came to give the belt to somebody else. Well, I'm just saying that was the environment. We'd have it at Las Vegas or New Orleans, and they would bring the people in and sweep the room for bugs. For a while, everybody was paranoid the government was listening. And, the first day would be open, and everybody could bring people from their office or their sons. And because I was so young and was a full member, sometime I think it got heat with, like, Jim Crockett's son, Jimmy, or Dory and Terry, Funk Senior, they're his boys, or Greg Gagne or Mike Graham, because these guys were my age or older.
Sure.
And they would make them get up and leave after the general meeting period. I'd hang around with the old folks.
Right. You're talking about the world titles that are on TV today. Of course, you have the World Heavyweight Championship and the WWE Championship, as well as the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. There are a lot of world titles, if you like. Now, of course, a different promotion is going to have its own top belt, but I wonder, I know that back in the days of maybe a Bob Backlund, who had the belt for years on end, and I can imagine being, if I had been around to see it, probably quite into the fact that he had it, and I would have felt that it was legitimate. Do you think the legitimacy is damaged now by perhaps the switchovers that go on? And there was a period where maybe every other month you had the belt changing. I mean, ideally, how long would you think a guy should have the belt in terms of holding it and for it to stay relevant to him?
Well, I can't really say how long. I can tell you that the way they do it now is wrong, because, I watch WWE wrestling and TNA so I can be current for my radio show.
Sure.
And I get mixed up. I think the Miz has the belt, but I'm not sure.
It's Cena now, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been passed over to Cena for the moment.
Yeah, and well, I think they switch it too often. I remember when Luthez was champion, and everybody knew who was the NWA champion. I remember when Bruno Sammartino was the champion, when Bob Backlund was the champion for New York. Everybody knew who was the champion. Nick Bockwinkel was the AWA champion, and everybody knew it. I watched it Thursday, and I couldn't tell you who's the TNA champion.
Would you?
You diminish its value every time you switch it. And it takes at a minimum of a year to reestablish that value again. And some of the writers today just use the belt as a prop.
It is.
In my day, I changed the belt with frequency, but it was always in the course of an angle, and Jerry Lawler always ended up with it again. So everybody knew that our champion was Jerry Lawler. He might lose it for a week or two.
Would you go on record as saying Jerry Lawler is probably one of the greatest of all time, as a smart to the business, ring psychology, worker, all-rounder?
Yeah, I've said that before. I've worked with just about all of them. And if I had to put one at the top of the list, it would be Jerry Lawler. And the reason would be because he scores high marks in everything. He's a ring general. He presents himself well in the ring. His timing's good. He can talk them in. He does everything very well.
It was, yeah. It was
Go
very,
ahead.
very interesting to see that Jerry got his match at WrestleMania recently with Michael Cole, of course, and that angle built over the course of the last few months. It was a nice gesture to have him on that show, and I would hope that it would happen again. It's amazing. I mean, everything you've said there, it's so true, because he can still work to this day, and you can just see how obviously it's that work ethic and the fact that he's always been Jerry Lawler, if you like.
Yes, he's good. No doubt about it.
And indeed, we don't want to keep you too long, Jerry. I mean, we've certainly we've picked your brain about a lot of different subjects at this stage. But overall, just to ask you yourself now, I mean, I know that currently you're active in business and various other fields. Of course, I know that there's NWA Hall of Fame that goes on, and various different things like that. But can you tell us exactly what you're up to now in terms of your own life, and indeed how are you in general?
Well, my health is good. It has steadily improved since my heart problems, and now it's gotten to the point that my doctor only sees me once a year, which is where I was before the heart attack. I'm finishing up my book, and it hopefully will be published in July. I'm doing a radio show in Nashville. I have a couple of projects in the work. One is a internet portal project. The other is a reality show that I'm working on. I have just recently sold all of my construction interests to my youngest son, Jason, so that I could pursue some of these dreams that I have, principally the internet portal, which could, really be big. Here's an example. Right now, you obviously do a good job with your broadcast. The problem is to promote where people would be able to find you all over the world would cost several $1 million, correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Sure.
So the hardest problem you have is people knowing where you are, or knowing that you're there.
That's exactly it, yeah.
Well, this project that we would have would be a portal, and when Google would search wrestling, that portal would come up. And a fan could go to that portal and find every podcast related to wrestling business in a list. They could find every television show related to wrestling in a list. They could download or stream or watch live every radio show, every television show that dealt with wrestling. They could type in the search engine on the portal a wrestler's name, and that would pop up and give you the wrestler's pictures, links to any videos on him, whether or not he had a web page, and if he didn't, it would give you an information page that he could service himself, like the web page. And what would happen is people that are interested in wrestling could go to the Pro Wrestling portal and find you. And so I think that it would, all of the quality efforts that are being made in contributions to the wrestling business get lost because nobody in the great world of Google search, you're overwhelmed. And whether you come up on the first page or the 50th page has a lot to do with the luck of the draw.
It does. You're certainly speaking our language there, because I mean, indeed, we do these videos, and at times, as you say, they can go under the radar. Maybe some people don't hear about them. I know it's always been said that, just like perhaps with a wrestling show, that it is all about promotion, isn't it? And letting people know you're actually there in the first place.
Right, and this would be the ultimate promotional tool. And I think that would be a nice legacy for me to leave.
It certainly would indeed. And
Certainly will be beneficial to many people like us and like yourself with your radio show worldwide, that's for sure.
Indeed, I mean, best of luck with all of those endeavours. You sound extremely busy, and at this point we've taken enough of your time. I want to ask you just one question. I may not have an answer if you like, but we indeed are from Ireland. I wonder if you had any experience, perhaps at all, with Ireland in any way?
No, I don't. I've always wanted to. My partner, John Corcoran, traces his roots back to Ireland and comes quite often, visit, and he's encouraged me to take a trip, and hopefully me and my wife can come one day. I'll sure look you up if I do.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Indeed.
We'll show you the town.
Listen,
All right.
Jerry, it's been fantastic to speak with you, and indeed, like I say, educational and insightful. I'm very thankful to have had you on, as I know you are. And
Fantastic.
indeed, I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we will hopefully speak with you at some point. If you would like to sign us up to the portal, without a doubt, we would very much appreciate that as well. But as always, our email and our contact always open to you. And indeed, if at some stage perhaps we maybe could have a chat with you again, that'd be great.
Thank you so much.
If
Good
you-
to talk to you.
If you want to, is it 104.5 Nashville? Is that the?
Yes, and you can go to 1045thezone.com and listen to the show live every Saturday at 11 o'clock.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure to get that one across to our viewers too. Thanks again. We
Okay.
appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Jerry.
Bye-bye.